The best of Apple versus the best of Google? Let's break down the Nexus 6P versus the iPhone 6s Plus. Now that a bunch of reviews got released for the Nexus 6P, I thought it would be a good idea to take both of these phones and do a comparison. The Nexus 6P and the iPhone 6s Plus are both made of anodized aluminum. Even though both phones have almost the same exact physical dimensions, the Nexus 6P actually has a bigger display at 5.7 inches versus the iPhone 6s Plus's 5.5 inches. This gives the Nexus 6P a 71.4% screen-to-body ratio, while the iPhone 6s Plus has a 67.7% screen-to-body ratio. The iPhone 6s Plus is a little heavier at 6.77 ounces versus the Nexus 6P's 6.28 ounces. The 6P has an AMOLED display with a 1440p resolution, pushing 518 pixels per inch. The 6s Plus has an IPS display at 1080p resolution, pushing 401 pixels per inch. I'm sure both displays look great, but if you were to put the phones right up against each other, I have a feeling that the Nexus 6P would have the better looking display. Both phones have 64-bit processors. The Nexus 6P has a Snapdragon 810 version 2.1 octa-core chip, while the iPhone 6s Plus has an A9 chip, which is a dual core. On paper, the Nexus 6P should outperform Apple's iPhone 6s Plus. On a lot of tests and benchmarks, however, Apple's lineup of processors seems to either keep on pace or even outperform a lot of the top-end Android phones. In real-life usage, though, I can't see it being a huge issue. Both phones are also using the latest DDR4 RAM, but the Nexus 6P has 3 GB, while the iPhone 6s Plus has 2. The 6P has a 3,450 mAh battery, while the 6s Plus has a 2,750 mAh battery. Again, on paper, the 6P should outperform the 6s Plus when it comes to battery and battery life. However, that isn't always the case. I would suspect, though, that both phones can last you an entire day even with heavy usage. The 6P has fast charging, though, and should charge up the Nexus a lot quicker than the 6s Plus would. I didn't think fast charging was going to be that big a deal for me, but now that I have it on my Moto X Pure Edition, I don't think I could get another phone without it. Being able to charge a phone in about an hour as opposed to 3 hours makes a huge difference. The Nexus 6P has an 8-megapixel front-facing camera, while the iPhone 6s Plus has a 5-megapixel front-facing camera with flash. I'm not really going to dive into the front cameras that much because I believe the rear cameras make a bigger difference. The Nexus 6P has a 12.3 megapixel rear camera, while the iPhone 6s Plus has a 12 megapixel rear camera. The 6P has a f2 aperture, while the 6s Plus has a 2.2 aperture. 6P, 1.55 micron pixels, 6s Plus, 1.22 micron pixels. Both phones are capable of recording video at 1080p and 4K. While both phones can record 4K video at 30 frames per second, the iPhone 6s Plus can record 1080p at 30 frames per second and 60 frames per second. The Nexus 6P can only do that at 30 frames per second. Both phones can also record in slow motion at 720p, 120 frames per second, and 240 frames per second. The 6s Plus gets an edge here, though, because it can record slow motion video at 1080p at 120 frames per second. So far in the articles that I've read and the videos I've seen, the 6P seems to have a very good, capable rear camera. A lot of reviewers are already pitting it up against the 6s and the 6s Plus, and they seem pretty comparable. While some reviews say the 6P performs better in the day than at night versus the iPhone 6s and 6s Plus, I've also seen the opposite, where they say the 6P performs better at night than it does during the day, but every review I've seen has shown a positive outlook on the camera for the 6P. And that's a good thing. I don't want to say that both phones are equal quality and it's a wash, but I believe there still needs to be more testing to figure out which camera is more capable. But so far, both cameras seem to be great performers, and I'm excited about that. Both phones have fingerprint readers. The Nexus 6P has its fingerprint reader on the back, while the iPhone 6s Plus has it on the front of the screen on the home button. It also seems that both are super fast to read the fingerprint, and most of the time you won't even see the lock screen. Now that the Nexus 6P has a reversible USB Type-C connector, it's right on par with iPhone's Lightning connector that's also reversible. There's nothing worse than waking up in the middle of the night trying to plug in your phone, figuring out which way it's supposed to go in. For the 6s and 6s Plus, Apple's added a pressure-sensitive display. I could see this being a real handy feature in the future. Feature in the future. I'm guessing next year's Nexus will have something similar. Next year's Nexus. Feature future. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. The 6S Plus also has optical image stabilization. That gives that another bonus for the 6S Plus. As far as speakers go, the Nexus 6P has dual front-facing stereo speakers, while the iPhone 6S Plus has one speaker and it's at the bottom of the phone. As far as a multimedia experience goes, you gotta hand it off to the 6P. The 6P also has an RGB LED notification light, which can come in handy. Instead of picking your phone up and looking for notifications, you can just check the light and see if it's blinking. Finally, price. The cheapest that you can get a Nexus 6P for is $499 for 32 gigs of internal storage. On the iPhone 6S Plus, the cheapest you can get is $749, and that only comes with 16 gigs of internal storage. At 64 gigs, the 6P is $549 versus the iPhone 6S Plus is $849. And finally, at 128 gigabytes of internal storage, the 6P is $649 versus the iPhone's $949. I have to mention, if you pre-order a 6P by October 25th, you also get a $50 credit for Google Play. I know that's not a deal breaker, but for anybody who's thinking about getting a Nexus 6P, you might want to take advantage of that. Alright, let me wrap this up. Both phones have solid build quality. The 6P probably is going to have a better display than the 6S Plus. Performance-wise, I'm not really sure, but for everyday tasks, I believe both phones will perform well. I'll probably say the same about the battery. Both phones will probably last you a full day, but the 6P has fast charging, so if you need battery or juice in a pinch, the 6P can do that for you. Both cameras look great, but I love the fact that the 6S Plus has optical image stabilization and that it can record slow motion at 1080p, and it can also record 1080p video at 60 frames per second. The 6S Plus also has pressure-sensitive display, which is just going to get better as time goes on as Apple and other third-party manufacturers start adding more features into this. But the 6P takes it with the dual front-facing stereo speakers and the RGB LED notification light and price. And we're not talking about a $100 difference here. We're talking $300 difference. Both phones have their pros and cons, but at a $300 price difference, that's kind of hard to swallow. But at the end of the day, I've said this before, it's your money. I'm just here to present the facts and help you make a better informed decision. Alright guys, that's it for me. Again, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below and I will respond to everything that I see, or at least try to, and I'll catch you on the next one. Alright guys, have a good one.